Today I want to talk to you about the Ecodiesel. That is the 2014 plus 3-liter V6 turbocharged diesel engine that has shown up in the Ram 1500s, the Jeep Grand Cherokees, the Jeep Wranglers, and the Jeep Gladiators. This 3-liter V6 diesel is not to be confused with the 3-liter V6 diesel that was in the 2007 and 2008 Grand Cherokees. That was a Mercedes engine, an OM642. This is a VM Mochuri V6 that was built in Italy, no relation to Cummins or Mercedes. These engines, since their release, have proven to be engines? No, that's mean. These engines have proven to be fairly reliable, and we don't think they have much more of a failure rate than other engines of their time. But going through this list of common failures we have seen on them will give you an idea of what to look out for if you're buying one of these trucks used, or if you already own one, it'll help you prevent any of these failures from happening. And since Dodge just announced the discontinuation of the engine for the 2024 model year, pretty soon anybody buying one of these will be looking at the used market. So this is what you want to check out for and how to make sure that you get a reliable unit. And first we'll dive right into emissions equipment. Unfortunately for you and I, the Ecodiesel was built after 2008, which means it has emissions equipment, unless it's a government truck. The emissions equipment on these trucks are very temperamental and they constantly have issues, especially if you live in a cold climate. Moisture in your DEF system, contaminants in your DEF system heater problems. All of these are very common failure points that'll put your truck into a limp mode so you can safely not go anywhere. This is really unfortunate because it can make otherwise reliable and should be fuel efficient trucks very not either of those. There are a couple of solutions to that. One, you can make sure that you keep the DEF system, the DEF fluid that you put into it as clean as possible. You can try to make sure that you allow it to do regens. You can try to make sure that you do longer drives with the truck periodically if you're only doing short drives to ensure that the carbon clean out or the regen cycles can happen to make sure that the emission system equipment is operating at its peak efficiency, or it can fall off. I don't know what your local states and laws are and your regulations surrounding trucks and their emissions equipment, but if you are allowed to take it off, you will increase that truck's reliability exponentially by not having it, just like the government did when they built theirs. Another thing we're seeing with these engines is the intake manifolds getting plugged up with carbon. This is due to the EGR feeding it back up through the intake manifold. So the two things you can do with this is removing the intake manifold and putting a new one on and just doing that every time it gets built up, or putting the new intake manifold on and then having the EGR accidentally fall off once you put the new intake manifold on and then not having the problem come back. A couple of options depending on your laws, states, and regulations. If you're looking at a truck that's already been tuned, that's probably fine. Just make sure that the tuner is a reputable tuner with good reviews on their tunes and make sure that the delete was done well. One of the great things about modern diesel trucks is that a tune will make it more reliable, more fuel efficient, and more powerful. Nothing else gives you that. It's amazing. Another recommendation we would have is doing transmission tuning to increase the line pressure, change up the shift points a little bit. It makes it a lot nicer and can also help its reliability, because apparently making things better also makes them more reliable. After that, I would look at the glow plugs. It's not really a huge problem, but we've seen fairly regular glow plug intervals, both from age and not a great factory design. So when you look at one of these trucks, if you have receipts of them being done recently, great. If it doesn't start very well or has any glow plug codes, it's quite likely that it could use an entire set. So budget that into the truck that you're looking for. It's not a terribly big thing, but you just want to be vigilant for it. Bring a scanner and check to see if it has any glow plug codes. The earlier trucks, the 2014s and 15s, also had exhaust coupler problems. This was a recall. Basically, you would smell exhaust fumes inside of the cabin when you were sitting at stoplights or driving around a little bit. If you do smell that, just take the VIN number, call your local dealership and see if the recall was done. If it's not, I wouldn't worry about it. Get that recall done when you buy the truck. It's a free fix from Dodge. Next, you want to make sure the oil and the coolant are not milky. It's not actually a head gasket problem so much as it is an oil cooler problem. The oil and the coolant are both cooled in the same metal piece on the front of the truck. Sometimes they will start to cross bleed and you'll get them mixing into each other. So if you see the milky oil, it will require both to be flushed and it will require a new cooler, but it doesn't necessarily mean the head gasket's bad. I would bring that to a local technician to take a look at it and bargain that into the price when you look at the truck to say, hey, it needs a cooler and some flushes. Not too bad. They're not really all that known for head gaskets. There have also been quite a few noted turbocharger and timing chain failures, and we're not sure how much of a worry that one really is. There's so many of these trucks on the road that those parts are bound to fail on any vehicle. So we do think that it's somewhat more common, so you want to be vigilant for it by listening for any timing chain rattles, checking for any codes due to the timing system, and making sure that the turbocharger doesn't smoke on startup. There's no white smoke out of the exhaust, no blue smoke, and it spools well. I wouldn't say it's a very common problem with these trucks, it's just a possibility that you want to look out for. Unfortunately for the Ecodiesel, it also uses a CP4 pump, just like the Power Stroke Cummins and Duramax. The problem is they're not nearly as talked about, so there aren't as many aftermarket solutions to ensuring the failure of the CP4 pump, which the lobe inside the CP4 pump fails on the roller bearing inside of it and then sends metal confetti into your injectors and requires you to have your fuel rail, your injectors replaced, your fuel system cleaned out, and your CP4 pump replaced. It's an expensive bill, it really sucks, and while a lot of the other manufacturers have support for this not happening, the Ecodiesels don't, because I just don't think there's as much of a market for it, and not as many people are aware of it. That isn't to say there aren't things you should be doing for it. Adding an additive to your fuel like Hotshot Secrets or Arch Oil really adds lubricity to your diesel to make sure that the pump doesn't have that lobe failure, as well as making sure that your fuel filters in the truck are always clean and trying not to put sketchy diesel in it. We don't see it as much on the Ecodiesels, but it's still a problem. After that, well, there's really not that much to say about them. They're fairly robust trucks. The transmissions are stout, you wouldn't really have to worry about that. Make sure that the fluid flushes have been done and the filter changes have been done. When you're looking at a truck that you're interested in, pull the dipstick, make sure that the fluid is pink, it's smooth, and it smells sweet. If it's any of those, if it's not any of those, be a little bit more concerned, especially if it smells burnt, that's likely a cooked clutch and you don't really want that truck. Or you have to budget in a transmission replacement. Other than that, it's a used old truck. You want to make sure that the rear end is good, the tires are wearing even. You want to make sure there's no loose suspension components, there's no cupping in the tires, that there's no excessive leaks. These are just regular used truck things that you want to look out for. If we were buying one of these trucks, I think we would just make sure that we do a front to back fluid flush to make sure that it's good to go once we buy it. We would make sure that all the filters in it are replaced, and we might add something like our billet cat fuel filter adapter. It goes where the factory fuel filter was and adds an adapter to put a cat fuel filter underneath it. That way you have a bit more ability to add extra fuel filtration, make sure the CP4 pump is getting some clean fuel. If you don't want to do that, maybe you get a fast system. A nice lift pump will give you extra pressure to your high pressure pump, and because it'll go through the return line system if it's moving more fuel than it's using, it's something called washing the fuel, where it'll actually get filtered more because it's going through the return line and back through the lift pump a couple more times. That's what we would do. If the emission system accidentally falls off, we'd throw a nice tune on there for the truck to forget about it. We'd add a little bit more fuel filtration, and we would make sure that it's well maintained. Good maintenance on these trucks can be the difference between you getting hundreds of miles out of it or hundreds of thousands of miles out of it. We hope that was helpful in looking for an Ecodiesel. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment them down below. We are always happy to talk about these trucks.